Charles Darwin's Beagle Library. Books, those most valuable of all valuable things. Charles Darwin in a letter to his sister Catherine, 1833. The voyage of the Beagle from 1831 to 1836 was one of the most important scientific expeditions in history. On board was the young naturalist Charles Darwin. His investigations would change science and the world forever. There was no sudden discovery on the Galapagos sparked by the finches, as popular legend has it. Instead, he intensively studied the geology, animals, plants, and peoples of the lands visited. Along the way, he made a number of striking discoveries, particularly in South America, which eventually led him to realize that living things must evolve over time. After his return home, he formulated what he called natural selection to explain how living things adapt to a changing world. When he published his revolutionary On the Origin of Species in 1859, he began with the famous opening line, "When on board HMS Beagle as naturalist, I was much struck with certain facts." As a research vessel, HMS Beagle may not have had the internet, but she did have an impressive state-of-the-art library of about 400 volumes. The library was housed in bookcases in the poop cabin at the stern of the ship, which was also Darwin's cabin. Thus, Darwin lived and worked in the library for 5 years. The library consisted of works that belonged to Captain Fitzroy and other officers on the ship, as well as Darwin. There was originally a catalogue which is not known to survive, so the contents of the library were long a mystery. Reconstructing the Lost Library. In the 1980s, the editors of the Correspondence of Charles Darwin reconstructed a list of 132 works that were probably in the library based on evidence from Darwin's notes, letters, and other sources. That list and a very important introduction, including a copy of the library regulations, is on the Darwin Correspondence website. Further works in the library were later identified from Darwin's surviving books and during the editing of his field notebooks, and for this project several further titles have been identified. Some of the references in Darwin's notes are very brief and obscure. For example, while on the Pacific island of Tahiti, Darwin noted cryptically in his Galapagos notebook, "Ellis horse story." What could this mean? The Beagle Library provides the answer. This was a shorthand reference to a book by the missionary William Ellis, who described the first horse being landed at Tahiti in 1817. The horse fell overboard and the natives on the ship, quote, "plunged into the water and followed like a shoal of sharks or porpoises." Darwin, too, thought the Tahitians seemed at home in the water. When he came to write his Journal of Researches, he mentioned, "The Tahitians have the dexterity of amphibious animals in the water." Some works referred to in Darwin's Beagle notes, etc., cannot be said with certainty to have been in the library. While noting these tentative items as such in our catalogue, we have included them in the online Beagle Library. Combining previous lists with new research creates our catalogue of 182 works, totaling 406 volumes. This is remarkably close to Fitzroy's estimate in a 16 March 1826 letter to his sister, "I flatter myself I have a complete library miniature upwards of 400 volumes." The Beagle Library was dispersed when the voyage ended in October 1836. It has now, more than 178 years later, been electronically reconstructed as part of Darwin Online. To achieve this reconstruction, scans of the books have, in most cases, been sourced online and then specially transcribed to make them searchable under the powerful Darwin Online search engine. We have been careful to use the same editions that Darwin had, or when not obtainable, the closest available. We have added missing pages, maps, and illustrations when those on Google Books or the Internet Archive, for example, were missing, and we have added better illustrations when we could find them. Other works in the library have been digitized here for the first time. For example, the plates for Humboldt's personal narrative are available nowhere else online in color. Now, for the first time, it is possible to search through the Beagle Library in an instant for quotations, places, people, species, and so forth. Some totals. The online Beagle Library consists of over 195,000 pages, containing more than 5,000 illustrations. The library, as far as it can be reconstructed, can be roughly broken into the following categories: travel and voyages, 36%, natural history, 33%, geology, 15%, atlases, nautical, 7%, literature, 4%, reference, 3%, history, 2%. At least 31% of the library was in foreign languages. There were 125 English titles, 38 French, 9 Spanish, 7 German, 1 Latin, and 1 Greek. Illustrations. Another surprise revealed by the online Beagle Library is the rich visual gallery it contained. Many of the works were beautifully illustrated with woodcuts, or engravings, or lithographs of animals or scenes of exotic lands. The online Beagle Library now allows anyone to see the amazing range of visual imagery that Darwin pored over during the voyage. Reading on the Beagle. As the Beagle was preparing to depart from England on her voyage around the world, Darwin outlined what he saw as his work list. The principal objects are, first, collecting, observing, and reading in all branches of natural history that I possibly can manage. Observations in meteorology, French and Spanish, mathematics, and a little classics, perhaps not more than the Greek Testament on Sundays. I hope generally to have some one English book in hand for my amusement, exclusive of the above-mentioned branches. Clearly, the library formed a major part of Darwin's Beagle voyage research from the start. Having the library now available online reveals the sources and inspirations that Darwin read day after day as he swung in his hammock during the long sea crossings, or as he worked on his specimens at the chart table or under his microscope. The Beagle Library was always at his fingertips. Before the Beagle reached a new location, Darwin was able to read the reports of earlier visitors. He could thus begin his work well armed with whatever was already known rather than starting from scratch. The scientific questions he found answered, and indeed left unanswered, in the library colored the way he thought about what he encountered. Perhaps the most important work for Darwin was Charles Lyell's Principles of Geology. This profoundly influenced Darwin not only as a geologist and scientific theorist, but contained the latest discussion of the gradual birth and death of species. Darwin's most inspiring model for a scientific traveler, and one of his favorite books, was Alexander von Humboldt's personal narrative. Darwin saw himself following in the footsteps of earlier voyage naturalists, and indeed he was. In May 1832, he recorded, "I have just finished Anson's voyage. My pleasure in reading such works is at least trebled by expecting to see some of the described places and in knowing a little about the sea." During one sluggish and tedious trip in July 1832, when the Beagle made slow time because of poor winds, Darwin noted, "The only thing I have been able to do is reading voyages and travels. These are now to me much more interesting than even novels." The Beagle Library was well stocked with a magnificent collection of classic voyages such as Narborough's An Account of Several Late Voyages of 1694, Wafer's A New Voyage and Description of the Isthmus of America from 1699, Dampier's A New Voyage Round the World from 1697, Penet's Journal Historique d'un Voyage from 1769, Bougainville's A Voyage Round the World from 1772, Hawkesworth's Voyages in the Southern Hemisphere from 1773, Cook's A Voyage to the Pacific Ocean from 1784, and La Perouse's A Voyage Round the World from 1798 to 99, and Vancouver's A Voyage of Discovery from 1798. As Darwin spent much of the voyage investigating the coasts and interior of South America, he studied the works of earlier travelers there with great care, including Ulloa's A Voyage to South America of 1806, Cowdclew's Travels in South America of 1825, Molina's Compendio from 1788, and Spick's and Mauritius Travels in Brazil from 1824. When the Beagle reached the Galapagos Islands in September 1835, Darwin first noted the extraordinary marine iguanas in his Galapagos notebook with the scientific name Amblyrhinchus, a name he found in Byron's Voyage of HMS Blonde from 1826. Byron had described the iguanas as the ugliest living creatures we ever beheld. Darwin consulted other works in the Beagle Library that provided information on the curious creatures of the Galapagos. Captain James Colnett visited the islands in 1792. Darwin scribbled in his zoology notes that Colnett claimed that the marine iguanas go out to sea in shoals to fish. But Darwin doubted this. "I cannot believe this is the object, nor is it very clear what their object can be." Darwin dissected several specimens to find out and discovered nothing but seaweed in their stomachs. Clearly, they were not fishing. Darwin used Werner's colors from 1821 to record the colors that could not be preserved in his specimens, such as fish or the eyes of birds. The book contained little squares of paper painted in different colors, which were standard in any example of the published book. For example, Darwin recorded a snake in his Santa Fe notebook in 1835 as primrose yellow, a color given on pages 38 and 64. Leonard Jennings, who published descriptions of Darwin's fish specimens, reported, "Darwin informs me that a comparison was always made with the book in hand, previous to the exact color in any case being noted." Darwin's reading was not exclusively scientific. As he recalled in his autobiography, "Milton's Paradise Lost had been my chief favorite, and in my excursions during the voyage of the Beagle, when I could take only a single small volume, I always chose Milton." Darwin also read Samuel Richardson's novel about the virtuous fictional hero Sir Charles Grandison from 1781. On the 4th of September 1833, while Darwin waited to start his next inland trek, he noted having read a Spanish edition of the politically charged trial of Queen Caroline, consort of George IV, as well as Shenstone's prose and Spanish storybook. "Nobody knows pleasure of reading till a few days of such indolence." That is from the B. Blanca notebook. Darwin also had 2 copies of the New Testament, one to keep up his Greek, and the other to help with his nasal German. Links on the introduction page allow readers to consult 2 complete versions of the Catalogue of the Beagle Library, one arranged alphabetically and another according to categories. Another introductory set of pages allows readers to view the thousands of illustrations that were at Darwin's fingertips during the voyage of the Beagle.